Hello and welcome to the Happy Pear podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Steve.
And I'm Dave. And Happy Pear podcast is all about health, well-being, happiness, and ultimately having a better life.
This week we are joined by Dr. David Hamilton. This is an incredible conversation. He wrote a book called, it's his 11th book called Why Woo Woo Works. And what we do is we unpack through a scientific lens why simple things such as kindness can reduce your risk of stress, or not even your risk, reduce your feelings of stress. He talks about the placebo effect.
He's a doctor of organic chemistry that took a turn and, evolved into the more softer sides of science and has really spent his career exploring these, and a best-selling author of 11 books. Really incredible conversation where we break down some of the simple basic things that we can do to lead a more fulfilled life. It was really heartfelt. It's
so many real examples, and just what a beautiful human. It was a glorious conversation. If you can stick towards the end where it gets really honest and beautiful, and David Hamilton, you are wonderful.
Yeah, really. So without further ado, we give you the wonderful Dr. David Hamilton. We've always been telling our kids to drink more water, yet recently they came back and showed us how to drink more water.
Ooh.
Yeah, my daughter came back with an Air Up water bottle about 6 months ago, and I was like, what's so fancy about this water bottle? And she showed me, like, it's literally got water in the bottle. It's got flavors, scent-based flavor pods in the top. You activate them, and it makes the water, like, it somehow uses scent-based technology that when you drink the water, plain water, it smells of one of the flavors. So in this case, I've got a pineapple pod. I activate it and I drink pure water.
Well, I'll tell you how it works.
Yeah.
It uses scent-based technology so that the flavor comes in through your mouth and goes up your retronasal cavity. Isn't that really clever? So it goes in the back of your mouth and up to your nose, where 70 to 90% of your taste or flavor is experienced.
Yeah, so what's amazing about it is they've innovated a water bottle to make it easier for you to drink more water that's fun and playful. There's 25 different flavours. My favourite is cherry cola with fizzy water. It actually tastes like cherry cola.
And I think the benefits are ultimately that you're reducing single-use plastic, and also you don't have to add any sugars to get water that tastes incredible.
Yeah, my mother-in-law loves the cherry one. I bought her a bottle too because she wasn't drinking enough water too, and she does lots of lawn bowls. So yeah, she likes watermelon cherry. So we've partnered with them. You get a 10% discount with the code HAPPY10, or we've got an affiliate link in our show notes. Please click that if you want to purchase them. And they're class. I'd really, really recommend them. One thing which I'd love to start our talk with is, like, you're obviously a scientist. You're a organic chemist, and a scientist. So rational science. And we went to school, and there was the career guidance teacher. And if you became a scientist, you're a scientist, and that's how it works. But somehow and I'd love to hear the story of how your career went from working for AstraZeneca, where you're on the science, and then suddenly now you're in how I would call it modern spirituality, where it's practical spirituality. Like, it's really, you're a kindness scientist. Like, which I think is an incredible way to describe yourself. And I'd love if you could just share that career path, because anyone listening might go, you might think that you need to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, and then somehow you made this route into something, and you can see you love it. Like, you can see in your eyes, you're lit up, and you're so alive.
Kindness in you.
Oh, thanks. That's very kind of you. Yeah. Well, I think I could probably chart the seeds of the shift in my career down to my mum having postnatal depression. So I've got 3 sisters, and my youngest sister was born in 1976. And my mum developed postnatal or postpartum depression. And it was at a time when it wasn't really well understood. I mean, certainly not compared to how it is today. And I don't think my mum got the right treatment that she needed. In fact, one psychiatrist actually said to my mum, you just have to give yourself a shake. And I sometimes think, asking a woman with postnatal depression to give herself a shake, I mean, that's like asking someone with a broken knee to just run it off, and so my mum struggled then with the aftermath of postnatal depression, which became clinical depression and chronic anxiety. And I remember I started high school. I was 11 years old, and I just had that. I knew my mum was unwell from time to time. I mean, she had it really well, but my mum had been hospitalised for a week or so at one point. And I remember I went to a library for the first time in my life, and it was the English teacher took us to the school library. I'd only just started high school, and I know this will sound really corny, right? But a book fell off the shelf, and maybe I bumped into my bag, I don't know. But it was called The Magic Power of Your Mind by a gentleman called Walter Germain. And I thought, I bet that could help my mum. And I just put it in my bag. Now, I didn't know that you're supposed to join the library.
I love it.
Get a wee yellow ticket, stamped. But my mum still has the book, by the way. forgot to give it back. And but it didn't cure her of depression. But what it did give her was tools and strategies, little practices that helped her to kind of navigate a course through some of the difficult times. Things like positive affirmations and meditation. I remember my mum when I was growing up saying, I can do it. It's the thought that counts, mind over matter. And she'd punch her, shake her fist, almost to give her the energy as she was repeating these affirmations. It really helped her. And so because my mum found these things helpful, my mum and I ended up having all these discussions during my teenage years about the power of the mind. And it led us into considering, spirituality and the nature of reality and alternative therapies and meditation, visualizing, all these kind of things that weren't really considered proper science. And so I went down the mainstream academic route. I did my degree, then a Ph.D. in organic chemistry, which is Lego building for adults with atoms instead of plastic bricks. And I ended up working in R&D, cardiovascular and cancer. But I remember seeing the results of trials of drugs that I'd been working on and becoming so fascinated by the placebo effect. And I remember talking to my colleagues, and that's amazing. And they weren't really interested because most of them are more interested in how well a medicine had been working. But for me, given my background of those conversations with my mum, what was more interesting to me was the power of the mind, or the power of belief or expectation or something that was driving a change in the body when a person took a placebo. So I started researching in my spare time the placebo effect and learning that belief itself actually fiddles around with your brain chemistry. And that was like, when I remember telling that to colleagues and they thought I'd lost the plot.
I could well imagine.
They were like, there's no way that belief or something in your mind could be changing your brain, and it was just dismissed as jokingly dismissed. But I thought this was absolutely amazing. And that was the beginning of my exit from a formal R&D job, because I realised, and I think it's because I spent so much time talking to my mum about this kind of stuff growing up, that my thirst and my passion was in that sort of field. So I just gradually just drifted away until one day I just decided, I'm going to go and write books and educate people and explore things like kindness, mind-body connection, all these kind of stuff, and build a science framework into it so that it can become accessible to people.
It's a very brave thing because, I'm sure so many people listening will go, there's loads of stuff I'm really interested in, but to actually leave a career which likely pays well, and it's got a clear career path to follow your passion is a really challenging thing to do. So, but obviously, as you said, the seed was, it was almost like destiny that the book, landed on the floor at age 11, and it turns out, you wrote a book on willpower versus destiny and all sorts of things as well. So it's, it seems like it's almost written in the stars to a sense.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder, I sometimes think along those lines, I think maybe sometimes there's bigger drivers, maybe bigger bits of guidance and encouragement that, it's kind of pointers in our lives, but I certainly feel that way about, how I moved in the direction that I've gone. I certainly followed a sense of purpose, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And kind of followed your curiosity. Your curiosity was totally leaning that way. Your passion, you were doing it at night studying the placebo effect. So it was like I'm just into this. And that's something I'd love to unpack with you. The concept of the placebo effect. The placebo effect is in a randomized trial, you'll give someone water, just a sugar pill, and they'll take it and they're not sure if it's the real thing or the false thing. Isn't that correct? And that ultimately that they get the sugar pill and yet they often create the same symptoms as the pill.
Yeah, I mean, because what happens is something that you believe or something you expect to happen. Let me use a well-studied example of pain. So if someone is given a placebo that they believe is a painkiller, let's say they've got pain in their back, just as an example, and they're given a placebo, a sugar pill, but they absolutely believe that it's a real drug, then most of the time the pain will diminish or it will go away depending on the type of pain. And some people would say, well, that's just all in the mind. But it's much more than that, because the belief or the expectation of having a reduction in pain actually now causes the brain to produce its own natural painkillers. See, the brain's like a pharmacy, and it has a range of different substances and combinations of substances which can deliver a number of different outcomes in the body. So when a person has a belief, then the brain produces what it needs to produce to deliver what the person believes. Well, within reason, of course. But that's certainly how placebo effect works for pain. Is the brain produces its own version of morphine.
It's amazing.
Because the brain knows that that's what's needed.
Like, it's so incredible. Like, I can even remember when my wife was giving birth to our daughter May, our first child, and I remember she was kind of like, oh, I'm like really struggling. And she was like, oh, please, I really need these painkillers. I need this. And the midwife was really clever. She said, we're just called a doctor. They're just going to get them. They'll be here in a couple of minutes. And even that, she never actually got them, but even that, which made her feel calm, felt like pain or felt like help was on the way. And I know myself, often I could be in the cafe and it's really, really busy. And I take up my phone to call Dave. Dave, I need you here now. And suddenly it dissipates and he comes in and goes, what the hell was wrong? And it's almost like we sense it. Like there's some sort of intricate, maybe my second example didn't quite align with it, but it's like, I get it. I totally get it. I'm such a believer in the power of the mind.
Yeah. And I guess even more specific, one of my favourite kind of placebo studies is people were given an injection of chili powder, or the extract from it. It's called capsaicin, and it would be injected into the right hand or the left hand. And but just before the injection, they would be given what they thought was a brand new experimental local anaesthetic, but it was really just like moisturising cream with a smell to make you think that it make it smell medicinal, and just moisturising cream. And what was amazing, if the moisturising cream stroke local anaesthetic was applied to the left hand, and capsaicin or chili oil was injected into the left and the right, then the pain only went away on the left hand side, but not on the right. And when they looked at the brain, it turned out that the brain had produced its own version of morphine, but only in the part of the brain corresponding to the left hand and not the right. So it's even better than the fact that your brain, produces what it needs to produce to meet your expectation, but it does it specifically where in the brain is necessary to meet exactly what your expectation is, again, within reason. I find that kind of stuff amazing. There's a biological basis for it.
It's like it's unlocking more of human potential, because, we spend so much time, like capitalism has us running. And like what you're describing here is like really unlocking some of the mysteries of human potential, because the human body, like obviously I don't think we'll ever fully understand it, but it seems like its potential is far beyond what you see signs of miracles on a daily basis. And even that leads me on to you see it baked into religion, the power of belief, these expressions that if you've got enough belief, you can move mountains. And you can see it time and time again that there is the power of belief. A child is trapped under a car and suddenly someone just channels superpowered strength and they're able to lift a car or whatnot.
Even the example, we were down with a friend, Mary Reynolds, and she was talking how there's a traditional Irish kind of almost like a sorcerer that used to study for 14 years and they could be a shapeshifter. And this is like traditional Irish mythology. And the reason why they studied 14 years was because it was only then that they fully 100% believed they could do it.
Wow.
And once they 100% believed, they could do it. But like it was almost like if they believed right now, they could save themselves 14 years. But it was just until they fully knew it was possible.
We're in alignment. That sounds very woo-woo.
And that's often the example that as soon as someone makes a discovery, it's almost like someone on the other side of the world makes a similar discovery, that it's almost, there's this link of intelligence and shared wisdom or knowledge and belief.
Yeah, it's like, what is it, like the 100th monkey experiment or the 100th monkey observation, that monkeys would be fed or they would have, sweet potatoes were dropped, but they were always dropped in the sand, and the monkeys learned to wash the sweet potatoes in the sea, and the other monkeys on the island must have thought, well, that's a good idea. They started doing it, and that was protecting their teeth from being damaged by the sand in the sweet potatoes. But all of a sudden, when they got to a certain number of monkeys, all of the other monkeys in different islands in the the whole of that region of the Pacific, all of a sudden, all of the monkeys and all of the islands that no monkey could travel to, all at the same time, just seem to understand that if I wash my food in the water, then it won't damage my teeth. They're not thinking along human lines, but they all learned it at exactly the same time. It's this little kind of tipping point that you get, isn't it? That all of a sudden there's something in maybe the collective consciousness we sometimes refer to, that, you know, an idea becomes big enough and then it just kind of filters out into everyone else or everything else.
That's an amazing one. And even in the placebo one, I just thought of it great. Myself and my daughter are super into Harry Potter, and in that there was a potion which was like a lucky charm. It was meant to give you like massive amount of luck, and Harry pretended to give it to Ron at one stage. Ron was sure he had it, and he played the best game of Quidditch, it's called, you know. But you get this, you see this every day with people, like, you know, with young kids. You can go, I bought you new shoes, these are the fastest running shoes you're ever going to run. And, like, you know, when someone believes that this is enabling something, it's much more likely to happen and unfold.
You jokingly have this magic rock, or these rocks that you carry around in your pocket, and you go, and just as a laugh, you know, those kind of awkward moments when you meet someone new, goes, here's my magic rock, pop it in your hand there and make an owl wish, it's gonna make it come true. And it's a bit of an icebreaker, a playful thing, or an icebreaker that Dave just has with people. But there's something also a bit of fun in it too, and a bit of like challenging one's belief.
Absolutely. But I really believe that we are capable of far, far more. And sometimes what limits us, I think, in our lives is just what we're willing to believe, or what we already believe, you know, is what kind of holds us back, or at least sets a seeming set of limitations upon us.
Yeah. Then
how do we put that into practice?
That's what I was going to ask. Like, how is, like, the body has the ability to produce its own morphine when we believe fundamentally that we have received an external pill, if you will, or an external that some other expert has given to us, that, and our body can produce this morphine in its, as you said, almost like our inbuilt pharmacy in our head. How do we start to channel that, or is it that we have to believe 100%? And that's
well, see, I used to ask myself that question. I used to think, well, how do you just switch on? How do you just believe? Do you read lots and lots of books? Now, it turns out that there's another process in the brain that's very similar to belief, but it's something that you're fully in control of, and it follows some of the same pathways in the brain, and it's visualization, and it's repetitive visualization. Let me give you an example. One of my favorite visualization studies, where volunteers were asked to play a sequence of notes on a piano, so just like basic with one finger, you know, plunk, 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 up and down a wee scale, for a couple of hours a day for 5 days. You know, not a couple of hours straight, you know, plunk, then take a wee rest, play the notes, take a wee rest, but for a couple of hours, 5 days. And they had their brain scanned every day in a region connected to the finger muscles. And what was amazing is that region began to grow like a muscle. And by the Friday, by the 5th day, it was significantly larger and more developed than it was on the Monday. But while they did that, while they played the notes, a separate group of volunteers sat not in front of a piano, but in front of a table, and they put their hands flat. And instead of playing the notes with their fingers, they played the notes in their mind. And they had to do what's called kinesthetic imagery. So you imagine what it would be like if you were moving your fingers. So imagine what that would feel like if you really were going plunk, plunk, plunk with your fingers. So imagine the feeling and sensations of it and hearing the notes. Now, they also did that for a couple of hours in the 5 days. And the same region of their brain also changed considerably. And if you put the brain scans side by side, you cannot tell the difference in brains, in the region of the brain, between those who played the notes with their fingers and those who played the notes in their mind. So in many ways, the brain doesn't really make a distinction between what you're really doing or whether you're imagining it. To the brain, that real and imaginary very often is exactly the same thing. And the key is, if you repetitively imagine something, it seems to go via a similar pathway as a placebo effect, but it's not that the brain's doing what it needs to do to deliver what you believe. But now it's the brain is doing what it needs to do to deliver what you're repetitively imagining to be true. But the power of repetitive imagination, as far as research goes a little bit deeper than belief, because you can specifically imagine a multitude of things. And if you keep working at it, then sometimes you find the brain can go a little bit deep, the effect can go a little bit deeper than ordinary belief.
It's
so
amazing.
that's something you don't have to just switch on belief. You can actually be in control through repetitive visualization.
It's amazing. It really, really is. And for, like, okay, so I'm sure people listening, same way me and Steve, and you kind of go, okay, I have a sore, say I've got a sore elbow. My elbow's sore. Like, how could I use this visualization to help encourage, like, obviously modern medicine is amazing and wonderful. How could I use it in addition, or, you know, alongside or exclusively, you know, to help speed up the healing process?
Yeah, so the key in all versions of visualization like this is to take an internal, what you call a mental representation. So how are you going to represent that pain mentally? So it's called a mental representation. Some people might represent it as, you know, swelling, or represent it just as a level of pain. So the idea is to turn a mental representation of of illness into a mental representation of wellness. So if you were mentally representing it as swelling, then in your mind you would turn that swelling into no swelling. So maybe picture it like an inflated balloon that you just pull the air out of it and it goes, and the swelling goes down to nothing. Or some other version, maybe putting an imaginary block of ice on it and imagining the swelling go down and change colour. Or if you're imagining it as a level of pain, maybe a dial, you turn the dial down. And it doesn't really matter how you do it. As long as you're telling your brain that I'm turning this mental representation of illness into a mental representation of wellness. The dial one was actually used by a hypnotherapist in Dumfriesshire in Scotland a few years back. One of the first experimental demonstrations of using visualization to control pain so much that after a few months of practice of this, of turning a dial down to 0, some patients in dental surgery went through root canal surgery with no anaesthetic because they'd learned to turn the dial down in their minds. So that's just one version of visualization. So you take a mental representation of illness and turn it into a mental representation of illness. Hands up.
Yeah, you're totally
It's
right.
incredible. It reminds me of yogis. You hear these yogis living in caves. Like there was some guy, Yogi Raman, or some kind of famous yogi who was able to, you know, control, like, unbelievable control of his body, that he was able to manage different systems in his body. And like, I think it was heat. It was certainly, you know, you hear of monks that can heat up,
Yeah.
you can put them in very cold places in fridges and they can heat the room so much so that they can dry all these wet blankets around them, and all these kind of incredible human pursuits of control within one's body and awareness.
In terms of visualization, David, is it like, say I'm visualizing here, is it just keep repeating the same thing? Like, say balloon, or like, say the swelling, it's swelling and it's unswelling and it's swelling and I'm just keep doing it, and it's like,
or is it
a 1 second cycle, keep going over and over for 5 minutes, or how does
or is it that I see a red mark that's kind of contracting little by little, or how does it work?
All of those ways. It doesn't actually matter how you do it. And I'm glad you asked the question, because 10 people with the same condition might visualize in 10 different ways, but all of them are correct as long as the end result is it's gone. As long as you get to an end result that says wellness, this is how I mentally represent wellness. So it could be a 1 second thing on repeat, or it could be just gradually getting it smaller and smaller. It depends on you. Depends on what you prefer to do. Busy people tend to do a 1 second thing really quickly and just visualize, you know, half a dozen times a day for like a few seconds whenever it comes into their mind. But other people like to sit down and focus on it, and they might just gradually imagine something getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it goes away. It doesn't really matter. What's more important is the consistency of it, is the fact that you're doing something consistently. And in your mind, you're getting to a point that says, well, that is a mental representation of wellness.
Because I remember hearing of you talking about a study where I think it was patients with some form of cancer, that when they practice this visualization, almost like a Pac-Man or like something like that, that it actually had significant improved results while applied as well as kind of, you know, modern medicine.
That was a study done with women who had breast cancer, and they were all going through the same treatment. So that it was surgery, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, and it was a standard treatment for that particular cancer. But half of them were educated in how the immune system works, you know, and how the immune system tends to tackle cancer. And they were to come up with a little visualization. So some of them might visualize like a macrophage, for example, you're enveloping and destroying a cancer cell, or other people, most of them actually tend to visualize something like a piranha fish or a Pac-Man going, and chomping away at the cancer. And again, it doesn't really matter as long as you have a mental representation of this illness, meaning the cancer being turned into a mental representation of the cancer isn't there anymore. And it turned out after, so many cycles of chemotherapy that it was an immunological study. So the study wasn't about determining the outcome. It was all about just seeing what the effect would be on the immune system. And it turned out that through the chemotherapy, many important immune cells and immune function began to drop in those going through the chemotherapy, but hardly dropped at all in those using visualization. And the scientists even quoted that even after 4 cycles of chemotherapy, the immune system is still highly cytotoxic, meaning killing cancer cells, but only in those women who are using visualization in addition to the standard treatment. Isn't that absolutely amazing?
It's amazing. Like visualization and manifestation, they almost seem like the same process, but for different things. Like visualization might be if I'm doing a sporting event, or if I've got a talk, or if I've got an exam, or or if I'm encouraging the healing process within my body. And manifestation seems like the same process, where you probably take action on it, but it's the same kind of process. You're visualizing the future. We're just using different words to describe the same processes. Is that kind of correct?
That's how I see the world, actually. This is when you start to bring in maybe the modern spirituality kind of side of things, because I often think of visualization inside the body. You shift little chemicals and substances around, but the same process it happens in the world. It's almost like the world, in some respects, is an extension of the body. The environment in here and the environment out there are somehow like maybe fractals of each other. They're somehow like connected, and your own state of consciousness, even though it doesn't seem obvious, because you're not like levitating things with your mind, it doesn't seem obvious, but in some subtle ways, maybe some of the principles by which your state of consciousness shuffles things about in the body also happen in the world. It just doesn't seem quite as obvious. And maybe this explains why sometimes when we hold an idea in our head, some seemingly miraculous stuff kind of happens or follows suit, and it's not obvious. It's more kind of subtle, because things have to happen within the available laws of life, laws of physics. But I think there's, just like the brain does what it needs to do to deliver what you believe is going to happen in terms of the placebo effect, maybe some aspects of life do what they need to do within capability to meet what you believe is supposed to happen, or what you're imagining is supposed to happen.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Because manifesting, people can see as many people who are kind of down the very science route can see manifesting as very woo-woo, very out there, quite kind of, hippie might be another term that people might, tarnish it with. And the whole idea of it is that you're visualizing a life that you'd want to achieve one day, and you're hoping to take action. I think that's the key bit that you often talk about, is that it's not just, visualizing it, sitting there in bed doing nothing. It's like, get up and work towards what it is you desire also.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we assume that if I just sit here meditating with a picture in my mind, then all my dreams will do. I'll open my eyes and it'll just land in my hand, and usually it's almost like you have to meet the world halfway. You've got to take the action. I remember coming back to what we talked about at the start, when I started to formulate this dream in my mind of writing books one day and educating about this sort of stuff, I had to take the action of leaving my job, and I had to take the action of writing my first book, which, I had taken a part-time job as a chemistry lecturer. So I had to find time within doing that job so that I could also write my book. And I actually ended up writing it in the middle of the night. I wrote the first draft of my first book literally in the middle of the night, because I started teaching at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on 3 days. It was my first class. So I started writing at about midnight, and I wrote till about 3:30 in the morning, and then slept till about 8:30. And I did that, 4 times a week for about 6 months. So sometimes you've got to take the action to, as well as, visualize for the things that you want. And I think sometimes, almost when you take the action, you're stirring the pot a little bit better and giving life more opportunities to help you.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like even last week we had a conversation with a lady who was a swimmer and she was a doctor of or she was a surfer and she was director of marine biology, and she talked about in water, it's very obvious to see the effects that one has, because when you go into water, you can see water so much more dense. You can see the effect that you have on the environment, and sound travels so many millions of miles. It sends so many miles underwater, and we forget that humans being in the atmosphere which we live in, it's just less dense, but we're still all connected and we still are all interrelating with one another and the atmosphere in every instance. So
absolutely. I have a picture in my mind a bit like that that's similar to the water picture, and it's like everything is interconnected, and it's like we're all connected like roots of a tree, but we're all really connected and talking to one another, but the connections aren't physically obvious, that they're more kind of subtle. Carl Jung used to talk about the collective unconsciousness and what he called synchronicities, when seemingly or connected events or people seem to fall together in time. And it's like maybe someone who's important in your life, who's meant to come into your life because there's a connection between you, but that person, you haven't met that person yet, but there's some sort of connection between you. And that connection is like an invisible magnet that's somehow pulling you together through time, so that no matter which choices you make, you just feel a subtle nudge from time to time that just gently, ever so gently, like a wind just gently guiding you through time, so that the two events or people just sort of come together in time. And it's like an entanglement of sorts. We're talking about, I actually did an actual quantum entanglement experiment a couple of months ago.
I love this. Have to tell us about this.
I actually did it proper for real. And so I'm, my PhD's in chemistry, but I love to always learn. I'm always learning. And I'm in I've just finished year 5 of a part-time degree in mathematics and physics.
Sounds fascinating.
Delicious.
And this is part of my final year. And so my final year quantum physics, I had to do a project, and part of the project was to prove the reality of quantum entanglement. So I had to use what's called a quantum computer, and I sent a particle to Manila and another particle to Nairobi in exactly the same time. And then what we had to do was rotate one of the particles, and there's just little techniques you use. And so I rotated a particle one way, and if entanglement is true, then what you're looking for is the other particle at exactly the same time will also rotate, or it will rotate in exactly the opposite direction. And you do this like thousands and thousands of times. And I actually proved the reality of quantum entanglement, because after all these trials, when I rotated the particle, no matter what angle I rotated it, whether it was like a quarter turn, for example, or a half turn, or a 3/4 turn, the other particle always mirrored it and also did quarter turn, even though there was no possibility of any connection between these particles, and even the time lag was instantaneous, so it was faster than the speed of light. And it was proof that there is some subtle interconnectedness between all things in the universe. In fact, as far as modern cosmology goes, at the beginning of the universe, all particles were connected. So technically speaking, every single particle in the universe right now is connected in some way that we would call quantum entanglement. So there is some physical connection that whenever something happens, like I click my fingers right now, and every atom in the universe must somehow be aware of that, because there's a little thing called an Pauli exclusion principle that means that no two certain types of particles can be in the same quantum state at the same time. So if I flick my fingers right now, it generates heat. It means every other particle in the universe must somehow be aware of the state of these ones right now to make sure that they can't be in the same state. And that's part of what we refer to as some sort of deep interconnectedness of all things.
It's incredible.
It's a great reminder that for anyone listening who feels like that their insignificance in their life doesn't make a difference, it's like they cannot not make a difference. Like to be alive is to be part of this wonderful tapestry of life, and that all your actions create a ripple. And I think that is the perfect segue into you talking about kindness, because I think that is such a thing. Even my son today, we were talking about, he was kind of, we were just chatting, and he was kind of getting a bit angry, and we were talking about like, what does the world need more? Kindness. That's what we were talking about.
And I love your perspective, because nowadays, like most people's stress is so rampant. Like in everyone's life, it just, you know, in the past 150 years, like the modern human's life is just, there's so many demands and expectations and comparisons, and stress is a very common norm. And I love your description of kindness, that it's the complete antithesis of stress.
Yeah, it's the opposite of stress. In fact, I often ask people in audiences, I say, what is the opposite of stress? And everyone says it's peace, or it's calm, or it's tranquility. But peace and calm, for example, they're not the opposite of stress. They're the absence of stress. Physiologically, neurologically, the opposite of stress is kindness, or the opposite of the experience of stress is the experience of kindness. And if you chart the physiological effects of stress and the physiological effects of kindness, you'll find that they're opposite. It's like a seesaw. As you increase the kindness, then the experience of stress goes down. In fact, psychologists once did this study where they sent people a text every evening and asked them for 2 number scores. One was between 0 and 10, what's been your average level of stress today? And the other score was, roughly speaking, to the best of your recall, how many kind things did you say or do today? And when they crunched all the data, what they found, on days when the kindness number score was high, the stress number score was low. And on days when the stress number score was high, the kindness number score was low. And they were always opposite each other. And it didn't mean that when you're being kind, that stressful things don't happen. Because of course they do. That's life. What it did mean is, because kindness is the opposite of stress physiologically and neurologically, when you're having an experience of stress, of kindness, it takes the sting out of seemingly stressful events. So the same stuff can happen, but it just doesn't feel as heavy or as stressful as it does before, because kindness is physiologically opposite. You know, stress increases blood pressure, kindness decreases blood pressure, etc., etc., etc.
This is
it's so incredible. Like, so stress increases blood pressure, it increases cortisol, it increases kind of, you know,
breathing,
it increases oxidative stress. Your heart rate goes up, all sorts of different things happen. And kindness, on the other hand, increases. It slows down your heart rate. It increases oxytocin. It slows down your blood pressure. You know, like it is like a tipping scales. Like there is a correlate.
Absolutely. And it's even an anti-inflammatory and an antioxidant. In fact, kindness, I call oxytocin a kindness hormone, because as well as being involved in reproduction and breastfeeding, it's produced through the experience of what kindness is like. That sort of feeling of warmth and connection that you get from helping someone or witnessing that or being the recipient of it. And so I call it a kindness hormone, just like we call adrenaline and cortisol stress hormones. And amazingly, what some recent research, cardiovascular and immunological research, found is, when you look at the process, or when you simulate, scientists basically took immune cells and cardiovascular cells, put them under stress in the lab, and what they found is something that happens when we're under stress: inflammation and oxidative stress, free radicals. Then they did the same experiment again, but plopped in a few drops of kindness hormones, and amazingly, the levels of inflammation and oxidative stress came dramatically down in the presence of kindness hormones. So that's another opposite, where stress increases inflammation and increases oxidative stress, then kindness has the opposite effect through reducing inflammation, reducing oxidative stress. So literally, almost everything you can think of that stress does, you can guarantee that the experience of kindness does the opposite.
So how does one apply?
This might correlate.
Super excited.
This might correlate to, say, like,
two excited puppies here.
Say, for example, like back 50 years ago in Ireland, the average size family might have been, or maybe it was 80 years ago, the average size family might have been 10 children
13,
or something,
50.
or 13. You hear of these massive families, and this wasn't uncommon in at that time across the world, really. And I could imagine that, like, for a parent, that would be unbelievably stressful. But obviously, if the parents had kindness, were kind and whatever, that it kind of helped buffer against this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If I'm talking about the big family, so I was part of the biggest family in the UK.
You were?
Yeah. My dad's grandmother was Spanish, and grandfather was Irish. The surname Byrne, and they lived in a little town called Croy in central Scotland, and they had, I think, 14 children. And the average of those 14 was like 6 or 7 And it turned out in 1974, we were the biggest family in the UK. And there was a lot of love there. There was a lot of love and a lot of kindness and stuff like that. Now, I will remember that photograph. We were in the photograph in one of the big national newspapers, and I was in the photograph. I vaguely remember as a 4-year-old being in that kind of...
And just flooded with burns. Burns is everywhere.
Yeah. So anyway, not much to do with the conversation about kindness, but
but amazing.
You mentioned about the big families in Ireland, and so my family came from Ireland on my dad's side.
And then in terms of applying kindness as an antidote to stress, is that having kind thoughts? Is that doing kind actions to others? Is that watching a kind show on TV? Is that like what?
Where do we start?
Where does it start? And how does,
because everyone listening's going, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
How is it like? We all know how to be kind, but how to cultivate it as a habit? I think that's the
as
question.
An antidote to stress. Like what a empowering thing.
So all of those things, actually, whatever way you access an experience of kindness, what that feels like. So for a lot of people, you can do, meditations. Like most people are familiar with mindfulness. So I refer to any meditation style that introduces ideas of kindness or compassion or gratitude as kindfulness. So any practice, so the Tibetan Buddhist,
that's brilliant.
So metta, which is a Tibetan Buddhist practice we call loving kindness in the West, where you think of someone in your life and you say things like, may you be happy and well and safe, and may you feel at ease. And you say these kind of repetitive, kind things. So you're thinking kind thoughts. I would call that a kindfulness practice. Even thinking of someone you care about and thinking for a few moments of all the reasons why you're grateful for them being in your life. That's also a kindfulness practice. So that produces the opposite of stress. Another thing is just kindness in how you treat people, how you communicate with people, and trying to be supportive rather than judgmental. How you think about people, then translate that into the way that you speak to people. Trying to give people lifts, say encouraging things to people, show people that you believe in them, and then you translate that into even the practical. What can I do? Is there people who come into my life who could benefit from something that I could do to help them? I think opportunities present themselves to us individually and uniquely every single day. And just being open to these opportunities as they present themselves. Is it possible I could help in some way, even if it's just a supportive word or something small? Hold my door for someone, for example, is an act of kindness. So it's how you think, how you speak, and it's also the things that you do. And everything counts. Absolutely everything counts. If you think of even the thinking, if you come back to that little analogy I used about entanglement and interconnectedness, let's suppose for a moment that interconnectedness, that entanglement wasn't just a physical phenomenon, but as a phenomenon that likes all of us somehow through our hearts and minds, through our state of consciousness. Then it means that every kind thought you have about someone is like sending that little ripple, like the swimmer analogy you used, and you see the swimmer going like that, and you can see the water being pushed out in front of the fingers as they swim. Maybe the fabric of reality, the fabric of this interconnectedness is pushed out a little bit every time you have a kind thought. And it's like you're sitting in water and you have a kind thought and you go, and this little ripple goes through the fabric of reality.
Amazing.
And somehow touches the hearts and minds. You can't see it physically. You might not see the fruits of it today, but maybe every single kind thought that you have matters. Just maybe.
I'm with
and they
you.
matter more than thoughts of anger or aggression or hurt or negativity. Maybe every kind thought was through
I think the older I get, the more that I realize that how I am, how my own, like how I feel and what kind of energetic mood or frequency, as in that each of us are all energetic beings walking around, and sometimes this stress and frustration and overwhelm, and then other times this peace and gratitude and love. And the more that I find that I can cultivate these nice states, it's just much more impactful from everything in my life. It seems like much more good stuff magnifies without me trying to be consciously productive and achieving. It just kind of, that aspect of just letting go and learning to be in a nice surrendered state tends to, which is challenging because...
It is challenging, but we recognize the state because we know what it's like. We've all had that experience of what it feels like when you've helped someone, or even when you've got to a space in your mind where you just suddenly thinking of how great someone is in your life. And it's funny because you get that little thought of how amazing a person is, and then you notice through this interconnected that sometimes something nice happens for them. And you often wonder, did my state of consciousness thinking about them somehow go and have an uplifting effect through somehow just impacting them in some way? But at the same time, you feel yourself to have just like slipped into the slipstream of well-being. Every time you think something, kind of do something, it's like you move into the slipstream, and there's a slipstream of well-being, of wellness. It's somehow moving life itself in the direction of something that's better for all of us.
Almost like your kind thought is blowing wind into the sail of another, helping them go achieve their dreams or whatever way.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Like, I'm adoring this. In terms of someone who is feeling negative and pessimistic and is afraid of, there's this term sometimes bandied around, toxic positivity. Like everything is awesome all the time, even when they're not really feeling it. They're putting this brave face on
or
it.
Fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it. How does one balance that, or find a point where there's a genuineness and where it's like, obviously it's a tough one. If I'm feeling like the way your mother was, postnatal depression, and feeling down, and the doctor telling them to shake it, like shake, just to make yourself feel good. How does one start along the journey where there's a genuineness and a kind of a realness, as opposed to a fake it till you make it type strategy? Yeah. And obviously there's probably a question with no one answer.
All sorts of grey. There's all sorts of grey we're hanging out in here.
Yeah, but I think sometimes just knowing that the more real and genuine you are, from your own experience that the more real and genuine you are, eventually, not always right away, but eventually the better the results seem to be in your life. And I think sometimes we go through little times in our lives when we have to learn that lesson. I remember years ago when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, one of the beginning of the beginning of my exit was a period of clinical depression, but I didn't tell anyone, because I was always the guy. All through my Ph.D, I was known as the positive guy, the guy that's always got something positive to say, and every cloud has a silver lining. I was always there to pick everyone up. I was the positive, always being positive guy. And then I got to this point where I just somehow lost my way, and it got so bad that I used to leave work as early as I was allowed, which was 4 p.m. I used to get in my car, drive home, park my car outside the house, go in the house, lock the door, draw the curtains, lie on the floor and cry. Wow. And I did that for a few months. And I felt ashamed. I didn't tell anyone. I started to withdraw from my friends because I was at this point where I started to worry that my mind was so distracted by my own feelings that I was having that I was struggling to hold a conversation. So I started pulling away from friends and not going out, because I was scared that I wouldn't be able to hold a conversation, because I was struggling to think of things to say. And it was like a little spiral. And I was so ashamed I never told anyone. And I was ashamed because I was the positive guy, the guy who was always had the answer for everything, the guy always had something positive to say. How could I admit to people that I was struggling so much? And my mum used to phone me and say, I know that there's something wrong and you're not telling me. And I used to just pretend, oh, Mum, everything's going great. No, son, I've just had this feeling. And one night I broke down in tears to my mum on the phone. And she said, right, you're coming home. And I literally got in the car and did what my mum told me.
I'm coming, I'll be there in 5 minutes, Mum.
And I literally drove 244 miles from Cheshire in the middle in England to my mum and dad's home in central Scotland. And I stayed a week with my mum and dad. And the beginning of my recovery, the beginning of it, was opening up and telling someone what was going on and how I was feeling.
Amazing.
And that was the beginning of the recovery. That someone was my mum and my dad, and I spent the whole week with them. I didn't do any work. I phoned work the next day and explained that I couldn't come in. Had to go to the doctors, etc., etc. And the beginning of my recovery, that took a few months, but the beginning of that recovery was that day I opened up to my mum on the phone, and I had a cry on the phone to my mum. And that was the beginning of what eventually led to, a year later, me leaving the industry and following my dream, my purpose to write and speak. But that was the day, the seed of it was that opening up. And it comes back to partly answering your question, I had to admit to myself that I didn't have all the answers, and I had to admit to other people that I didn't have all the answers. I was bottling everything up on inside, and that was a big lesson for me. That I've learned several lessons since then, of course, but that was one very important lesson to me, that it's no use pretending all the time. You have this thing called smiling depression, where you just smile, I'm okay. And I had something like that. I just smiled to pretend that I was okay, but I wasn't inside. And sometimes in life, we've got to find this balance, and we've got to learn that results tend to be better in the long term if we're willing to be honest with ourselves. And it doesn't mean, sometimes there's a benefit to fake it till you make it in some contexts, but we've got to learn what those contexts are, and also learn what they're not, and find that balance. And I think that only comes through experience, and also maybe the learning of stories. Like me, the reason I'm sharing this story right now is because sometimes we can learn from other people's experiences by seeing something in them that I recognize in myself. And that sort of gives us that little impetus, that little trigger. Maybe the next time something, not the same, but similar in my life comes along, maybe I'll know what to do.
It's an incredibly powerful story.
Beautiful.
Like, it really is. You're so brave to share it. Like, it really, really is. Because I'm sure there's many people, myself, everyone can relate to it. Like,
putting a smile on a kind of sad feeling, and oh no, I'm grand. Whereas ultimately, kindness starts with yourself, and kindness and love is honest. And I think that's an important.
Yeah, like we're 43, and the older I get, the more my own experience is that the more honest and transparent. Like, I fundamentally believe that we're all interconnected, as we've been discussing quantum entanglement, as you were saying. And the more honest I am with myself, the more honest I am with others. Like, because ultimately we are all connected in some form, and there's no point in me lying to myself if if we're all interconnected, because ultimately it just mirrored back to me, falseness or.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And I think it's just learning in life, isn't it? It's just experience. I don't know if there's a single answer that's one size fits all. It's just, we just got to experiment, try. I think everyone in life is just trying the best they can with the available tools and knowledge and experience that they've had. And that's another thing about another way to be kind, is to cut people slack, because you never know what people you absolutely never know what people are going through, but people are always, most people most of the time have something that they're dealing with that they just don't tell you about. And I think it doesn't excuse all behavior, but it gives you that wee bit more patience and compassion for people, which is a little act of kindness that you do in your head that can inform maybe the way that you respond to some of the challenging people and some of the challenging times in our lives.
Yeah, it really is. I think that's the ultimate kindness, is that, and it's such a habit and a life's work to be able to cultivate kindness and compassion and empathy and non-reacting to when you're in challenging situations and someone's pressing all your buttons, and you can go, well, I'm sure you're having a tough day too. Like it really is. It's the ultimate self evolution and evolution of one's ego and all of these various things.
And finding that sweet spot, isn't it? It's finding the sweet spot of where is self-kindness for me, because sometimes I'm saying it's easy enough to say sometimes that everyone's having a difficult time in some way, and I'll cut people a wee bit of slack. And that's easy to do sometimes, but it's much more difficult to do other times. And it's finding that sweet spot, because sometimes other times the act of self-kindness is to remove yourself from the room or from the situation, if that is possible. And so sometimes self-kindness can be fierce, because it has to be. And again, it depends on the context of your life. It depends where you are and what uniquely is happening in your life at this particular time. But as a little guide, that's where I usually start from, but it doesn't always work. I usually start from, you never know what a person's been through or is going through right now, but sometimes it's too hard. Sometimes it is too difficult, and you just have to make different sorts of decisions.
Amazing. So it's like, just to summarize where we are right now, in terms of the antidote to stress is kindness. And kindness, you can start from anywhere, whether it be kind thoughts, whether it be kindness towards yourself, or kind of gratitude. Gratitude and kindness seem to be intertwined, and something that
absolutely.
Different words for
I was
similar
even just
things.
looking on your Instagram there before this, just that you were talking about the importance of gratitude before going to bed, and that there's research showing that even you having, when you're lying in bed there, just saying a few things that you're grateful for during the day actually benefits your sleep. Not to mind reduces your stress. Not to mind helps you put it in a more state of peace and calm.
Yeah, absolutely. Gratitude and kindness, they are so similar, because in a sense, gratitude is an act of kindness. You're actually being kind to something that is, and you're noticing, you're preferentially paying attention to something that you're grateful for. So out of the backdrop of everything in life, it doesn't mean you're ignoring the seeming negative things in your life, but you're just paying more attention to the things, to some other things. And what tends to happen is that feeds back on itself. And the more you cultivate a sense of gratitude, the more calming effect it has on the stress that's building up in the average person's nervous system.
It's amazing. It really is.
It really is. Like, I love the title of your book, Why Woo Woo Works, and woo woo meaning alternative approaches towards.
Yeah. Why did you pick, like, it's wonderful because you've taken the sword out of anyone's hand. Like, people go, that's really woo. You've just gone straight out there and taken the sting out of it straight away. I think it was such a smart way to do it.
I wish I could take credit for the title, but I can't. It was actually, of all my books I've written, I've always known, while I was writing one, I've always known roughly the direction the next one will go in. And I didn't know what my next book was to be. And I went to Michelle Pilley, the MD of Hay House, and I asked for a meeting with her, and I said, Michelle, you've got your finger on the pulse. You know the sort of questions people are asking right now. I want to be of service in some way. So I said, given the questions that you're feeling people are asking a lot, given my skill set, how could I best help? And she said, well, what about Why Woo Woo Works? And we laughed that obviously we'll not call the book that, obviously. And that was the joke. There was no way I was going to write a book with that title, but we sketched out roughly what it would contain, what kind of questions that people were asking that I could address with a balance between science and spirituality, or science and alternative therapies, and find some sort of sweet spot between mainstream and alternative, and say, for me, the conclusion is sometimes more of that and less of this, but other times more of this and less of that. But somewhere in the middle, there's a balance that I think best serves all of us, to find that sweet spot somewhere in the middle, a bit of that, something's more of one, less than the other kind of thing. But I remember saying at the time, there's no way I'm calling it Why Woo Woo Works. But the more I kept telling people it's a working title, the more it just sort of seemed like that is actually the book's name. And gradually it just became, by accident, it became the book's name.
It's such
brilliant.
a cool. Has it done better than the 11 books?
The best
10
10
books prior? Because it's such a, like, even I hear that title, it's like, geez, I want to read that book.
That's clever.
Yeah.
It's so brave. Like, it's really...
Yeah. It's actually been my bestseller so far of my 11.
Congratulations. That's so wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm currently working on a new book on the subject of kindness, and I'm trying to think of an inspiring, equally cool title, because I think that sometimes the title matters as much as the content of the book itself.
I think it really does. Yeah, you look at they say in terms of like YouTube videos, it's the thumbnail and the title have the biggest impact on.
Yeah, I've never really paid that much attention to titles in the past, not as much as maybe I should have, because I think I've written some good books that maybe had the title been more compelling, maybe they would have reached more people or helped more people. But maybe things come around in their own way at their own time, I suppose.
Yeah,
Kindfulness is a great one.
Yeah. Because when you look at your evolution over the last 11 books, like, it really is, there's a common thread through them all. Like, there really is, in terms of the exploration of kindness, gratitude, all the various these, like, which are called alternative, but the softer sides of, you can call them science or medicine or healing or whatnot, but evolving and waking up to, in a sense, like, there's this common thread throughout them all.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that, because that's exactly how I feel. That has been that kind of common thread for me is heart, is kindness and gratitude and compassion. Because I think if you really try to explore, what's life about, and if I think you usually get to the point, well, I may as well just be kind. I mean, for me, I have my own spiritual view of the world, and when I start thinking and contemplating it, it always brings me back to, well, I may as well help everyone I can as often as I can in the best way I can, given my skill set. And that's sort of how I lead my life, and it's what informs all of my writing, and it's what informs all of my social media content. There's always just that little background of just trying to help in some way.
It's a great philosophy. The one thing which I kind of find I sometimes struggle with is, we live in a competitive society where, there is constant comparison, and it's like, I always want to be this open, giving, kind person. And then sometimes I find, probably when I'm tired and overwhelmed and I feel pressure and stress, I feel I contract a little bit in that sense of, well, I need to like squirrel my nuts over here under this tree here. They're my nuts. No, I don't want to share them with anyone else. There's that aspect of kind of me and ego and
fear.
It's absolutely fear. It's rooted with fear rather than... And the more I find I'm in flow with life, the more open, and I'm not holding on to anything. I'm just flowing through, and there's just ease and grace and harmony, and it seems so simple when I talk about it.
Yeah, no, I totally, I hear you, because I'm very similar, and it manifests slightly differently for me. Sometimes I feel like I'm really in the zone, and I push out, and I'm doing lots of videos and lots of talking and all that, and then I go through a wee phase where I just out of balance, and I just find myself shrinking away again, and my social presence reduces. People probably don't notice, but I notice. Even recently, I've not posted as much because I've just not felt the same. And I have these little moments when I've always struggled with, little moments of anxiety that sometimes just appear. And I understand it better than I did in the past, and I deal with it differently, but it affects me in ways that I just sort of shrink down a wee bit, and then I go out, and then I come back a wee bit, and then I go out, and it's just how
inhale,
I roll.
exhale. It's like an inhale, exhale.
It's the ebb and flow. We were talking to Dave mentioned Eski Britton, who's a doctor of marine biology, and she talks about the importance of the ebb and flow of life. That there's a natural rhythm of life, and when you ebb, there's equally you got to flow. What goes up must come down. Like there's a natural.
Absolutely.
It seems like with you. You're
day.
social and you're out there, and then it's like, no, I need to recharge, I need to be introverted, I need to guard that, and then it's like, I'm ready again, hello and welcome.
That's exactly what it's like for me, and I'll produce a ton of social media videos, and then I'll do nothing for like 2 months.
Yeah, and then you
write a book, and you go out there and do all sorts of stuff, and then come back again. And then,
yeah, it's exactly that. Is exactly me. I just maybe it is a natural ebb and flow, and I should be slightly kinder on myself.
That it's your rhythm,
and not try to rush the getting back out there.
Yeah, because it's more coming from a point of genuineness, because ultimately digital content is a representation of the analog.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I think.
Wow.
But yeah,
that's a great insight. That's good for me to to practice, to be a bit more aware that is a natural.
Because I know myself with social media. If it's forced, it's not real, it's not authentic. And if it's real, it's coming from this point of like, there's an honesty and it's real and you're in it, as opposed to when you're forced.
And ultimately, like, it may seem like a digital kind of thing, but as you said in your quantum entanglement, that each fragment is completely connected, and at an energetic frequency, all of life is interconnected. So if you're not feeling in alignment and excited and have something really good to share, well, that's probably going to be mirrored back to you. Whereas when you feel like sunshine and lollipops, and like you are now, you're so lit up, like you're as passionate. I'm looking at you, going, oh my God, you're just such a passionate, kind, shiny human. And any listening's going, I want to be like him. How do I be like him? I want to feel as passionate about anything as you do about as you are right now. Like it's beautiful to see.
That's lovely to hear, actually, because certainly you've really captured what I feel like a lot of the time. Like, I don't produce any content if I don't feel in that sort of alignment, if I don't really feel it in my heart, and sometimes I have been a wee bit feeling like maybe I need to quickly get into that space. But then I like your analogy of the ebb and flow, because a little bit more patience sometimes, and I'll emerge. Like today, as part of me emerging, actually, us having this chat today, I'm beginning to feel really good.
You're ready for it.
In comparison to how I might have felt over the last couple of weeks, where I've not really been producing a lot of content. I've just really not felt as aligned as I had been. So I think that kind of natural ebb and flow is actually very, very natural for all of us.
And also, I found sometimes if I was going to share content when I didn't feel like it, the content might be, I don't really feel like doing this right now. And I don't feel like it's coming from a point of not this big, upbeat, high, generous energy. It's more like I'm vulnerable. And suddenly that's almost more relatable.
And the idea which is coming to my head is there, back when we were in our early 20s, we used to hitchhike. And I remember hitchhiking was such a wonderful, we used to find it of terms of like your energy, because when you were feeling scared and vulnerable, like you just never hitchhiked, because you knew you were going to be prey. You knew you were much more likely to come across some experience which was not what you were looking for. That we were both very aware that only hitchhike when you felt confident, comfortable and strong in yourself, because the cars that were going to stop were ones that were much more likely to, be going your journey and magical things can unfold. So we were hyper aware that what we were putting out into the world was going to be reflected. So that was a really interesting, experience of it.
Yeah, I went through a wee transition kind of last year. I lost my dad last year. He had a brain tumor, and it was just like right out the blue, glioblastoma multiforme, and just on that side, and it was just right out the blue, and we did everything we possibly could. My dad lived he'd like 7.5 centimeter tumor, but he lived for nearly almost a year, and I think when he passed away, I just shrunk back completely, just shrunk back from everything, and I did almost nothing for about 3 months, and I almost felt like I needed to honor that time, that rest time, and I made a decision that I would never go back to being as busy all the time as I'd been before, because I'd always been really busy. And when my dad was unwell, and I was taking him to his treatment, because I've got 3 sisters, but they work full time and I work from home, and it's much easier. And I enjoyed having that experience where I would drive my dad and my mum like 50 miles or 100-mile round trip to get his radiotherapy, for example, or to go in for his surgery. And I remember thinking at the time that nothing in my life is more important than this. And I remember putting aside everything that was busy in my life because I needed to take my dad to the hospital. And I learned something really important during that time, that I had been so busy for so long, I'd forgotten what it was like to not always have a ton of things that I had to do. And so when my dad passed away last October, I just decided that I needed to honor that kind of space, that learning that I'd had, of just not falling prey, if you will, to the constant sort of demands and needs of everything around me. And I just literally pulled right the way back for the best part of 3 months, really, or towards basically the end of 2022. I hardly done anything. I did a few things, but really nothing compared to what I'd done before. And I've never really gone back to being quite as busy as that before. I get tempted, I get drawn in from time to time, but it was part of the commitment that I made to myself of finding a little bit of honouring, I think, the ebb and flow a little bit better than I had in the past, and not trying to flow when I really needed to ebb, so to speak.
Yeah, more in connection. Beautiful. Jesus, wow, what a...
There's loads of nuggets in that where I go, wow, okay, that's because it does take such conscious intention to not be pulled into the absolute going full tilt, because modern life nearly demands that we go at full tilt.
Yeah.
Because, we're sold these illusions of the things that we need to feel complete. And then you catch yourself and you go, no, I'm doing this again. I'm caught in this idea that I need to become something, or I need to have something, or collect something. And it's usually when you're, when something happens that makes you reflect and go, oh, geez, I did it again. I'm a sucker for it again. How do you set it up where you can just take your time and kind of go, well, let's just smell the roses and not get too dragged into the weeds of life?
I sometimes find that life could be finding that balance between trying to manifest what you want and just being who you are and just being whatever you are in response to life. And I think sometimes there's a wee sweet spot to be found between pushing out and manifesting, so to speak, driving for goals and aspirations, and just literally responding the best you can to whatever life presents in front of you. And I find my life has been more of a journey of finding that kind of sweet spot. And sometimes when I lose my way a wee bit and I'm not really sure what I need to do or supposed to do, I just come back to this. I'll just try, despite anything, no matter what's going on, I'll just try to be the best person I can be. And that's always my barometer. And I think as long as you're doing that the best you can, even if it's just a single thought, I think you'll always go in the right direction, even if you don't think you are.
Well, you're as shining a light as we've met.
And I love your honesty of, like, there's a theory of manifestation and creating, but then there's also being present to where you're at. And I love your personal honesty and the challenge of it, because it really is a challenge. There's no one perfect answer.
No, and I think there's times in your life where that is the answer out there, but there's other times in life when this is the answer. I sometimes think of it like, and I've used this analogy in the past, it's like you're in a little canoe on a big wide river, and your canoe represents, your mind and you manifesting and all the tools you have to create what you want. And you can paddle that way, or you can paddle that way, or you can do what many of us do and just paddle around a wee circle as we go down the river. But what we forget is sometimes the river has a current, and sometimes there's a wind blowing, and sometimes you're trying to paddle over there, but the current is going that way. And sometimes you smack into a dirty great big rock and you lose your paddle altogether. And so sometimes in life, and I think we sometimes think that if I'm not manifesting all the time, then I'm doing it wrong. But maybe people are manifesting all the time. Maybe they're in large parts of their river that are completely calm. But not everyone's river's like that all of the time. And I think sometimes your river is like the rapids, and sometimes you've just got to let go, throw the oar altogether, and just see where you end up. And within that, just try to be the best person you can be, and be nice to people along the way, the best that you can. And I think you'll probably end up somewhere that maybe you didn't expect, but maybe somewhere quite sweet, as long as you keep that barometer. I'm just going to try to be the best person I can as I navigate these rapids and rocks. And maybe I'll end up at a big calm part of the river again, and there'll be another portion of my life where I might be able to start paddling again and focusing on where I want to go. So I think there's an interplay between, forces of destiny, you might call them, and being able to create what you want. And it's not always obvious where you are in your life.
And that's beautiful. I love that. What a nugget of wisdom.
Yeah. And it really is that it's only through hindsight. Like, you can look back and go, oh, that's where I was, and you can articulate it. But in the present moment, it can often be difficult to know whether you're in a let go phase, or a paddling around in circle phase, or hitting. Well, usually when you've hit a rock, because you're struggling. Those ones are quite obvious. You don't need to look back for those ones.
But thanks so much for this conversation.
There's so many nuggets it's been so life affirming, and you're a joy. You're an absolute joy to talk to.
It's been an absolute joy speaking to you too as well. This has been great. I mean, I just looked at the clock there. I cannot believe we've been talking for so long. It feels like, I don't know what time it feels like. It's just been such an enjoyable
And it feels like it's getting very real and raw, which is beautiful. Yeah, really nice. Really, really lovely.
Yeah, really great.
Yeah. So you've 11 books out, Dave, and your most recent one is Why Woo Woo Works, and people can find it anywhere.
Instagram, you've got courses on your website. You got personal development, a monthly one and a yearly one. You can check that out, where he does cooking demos. Cooking demos of Blue Zone recipes. Not necessarily loads of incredible topics.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, and your content on Instagram is great. Really, really good.
Oh, thank you. I'm feeling a bit more aligned. I'm beginning to flow again from the ebb, so I'll probably start producing a lot more videos quite soon.
You can feel it in the ether.
I can feel it in the ether today, anyway. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to
thank
meeting you. If you ever feel like a trip, we're over here in Ireland and you're welcome to come visit anytime. We'd love hanging out.
Where are you? Where are you exactly?
Greystone. So it's about 30 kilometres south of Dublin by the sea.
Oh,
and
great,
we've a cool
right.
little world. We've like got a farm and a cafe and shop and products.
Oh, wow.
And lots of bits of the business, and it's really fun. We love it.
Yeah, great. I've been to Dublin several times. I've spoken in Dublin about good half a dozen times, I think. But
Wow.
not for a few years, not for about 3 or 4 years.
Could be time to do another one. We're more than happy to host you and feed you and show you around.
And hang out.
Yeah,
and we can.
anytime, yeah, great.
Great.
That'd
Well,
be
I'll send on our numbers anyway. Sarah, I
Sure.
think is your email, so I'll send on our numbers. So please, I look forward to hanging out and spending some time.
Great, fantastic. Thanks. Well, thanks for today. This has been a fab conversation.
Great chat. Yeah. Loved it. Adored it.
Me too.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Thanks a million.
I look forward to hanging out.
Yeah, me too. Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Thanks a million.
Yeah,
Really appreciate
Thanks
it.
a lot. Right,
Yeah.
take care then.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye then.
Bye.